Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Access Granted Small Business Resources webinar. I am Dr. Portia Jackson, Business Development Manager here at the City of Houston's Office of Business Opportunity. We hope that everyone is safe and well as we are bringing to you our last series or last episode in our Small Business Resources webinar. And today we're going to talk about the city's Small Business Economic Relief Program, as well as give you tips on how to file your taxes in regards to receiving COVID funding and legal tips that you should know with starting your business as it relates to COVID. So before we get started, just some housekeeping notes. Please make sure that you are on mute so that we can hear all of our speakers. We will have a question and answer at the end, but we are going to have a special question and answer after our first presentation. So at that time, then we'll ask you to raise your hand and we'll call on you so that you can voice your questions to our panelists today. And as always, to make sure that you know, you can find more information to help you through COVID-19 at our website, houstontx.gov/OBO. You will see a red bar, and that is our COVID information hub. Also, you can tune into the previous episodes of Access Granted by visiting our YouTube page, which is Houston TX OBO. And we'll share that information at the end of the webinar so that you can have the exact logins to our social media and make sure that you stay connected with us. This webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to access this next week when we send it out as well to everyone who registered. So today we are...
That's me, I'm sorry.
We're going to get started with the person who's ringing off the hook right now. So I'm going to introduce our first two guests. Our first guest is Marsha E. She is Director here at the City of Houston's Office of Business Opportunity. Marsha has been here for, I want to say maybe 7 or 8 years here at the city. She can correct me if I'm wrong. She started off as our Deputy Director here at OBO, and she's also served in our legal department. She has led operations, including what you may not know is the legal services, the free legal services that we have here at the office. That was her idea, and she has spearled that effort. And you'll find out more about that information when we talk about the legal services that are available here. So we want to welcome Marsha, but before Marsha shares her presentation, I also want to introduce Marlon E. Mitchell. He is the President and CEO of Houston Business Development Incorporated. We call it HBDi. He has over 31 years of combined experience in commercial lending and community development. Under his leadership, HBDi has facilitated in excess of $84 million in funding to small businesses. And if you've ever been to the Palm Center, you know that it has been redeveloped, and he is the face behind that. So Marsha and Marlon are going to talk to us about the Economic Relief Program and how that happens, and also will answer any questions you have about that funding. So I am going to turn this over to them and allow you to take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Jackson. So I have actually been with the Office of Business Opportunity for over 8 glorious years with just a 5-month gap. I'm really excited to be a part of this webinar today, to be actually for the last webinar presenting about a resource that we know that so many of our local businesses and chambers will be able to benefit from. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll share my screen. Okay, there we go. So the City of Houston's Small Business Economic Relief Program actually kicked off officially last week, Wednesday, and we have been steadily accepting applications since. So this program was really created to be able to provide financial assistance to our local small businesses and chambers. The city understands that there's been a variety of financial resources made available since the onset of this pandemic, but there's still a vast need out there, despite the funding that's been put forth by the county and by the federal government via the PPP as well as the EIDL loans. So the city has decided to use $15 million of the CARES Act funding that we received to be able to support our small business community. So how we've decided to design this program is to allow businesses to be able to receive up to $50,000 in grants. That's money that does not have to be paid back. So it's really exciting. And this program again is designed for for-profit businesses as well as our local chambers of commerce, because we recognize that for chambers of commerce, they're really important to being able to support our local businesses in the community. So awards will be made to qualifying businesses that demonstrate that they have the most financial need and they exhibit a reasonable likelihood of surviving the impact of the pandemic. So that is how we've decided to kind of prioritize who actually receives funding. And the kind of assistance that this program provides is not just financial assistance, but also technical assistance. We wanted to, in addition to the money, we wanted to provide businesses with recovery and resiliency technical assistance to walk businesses through, what are some of the steps that can be taken to make sure that they can actually survive during this very difficult time we understand that businesses are actually facing. So the program was designed by the Office of Business Opportunity, and we are overseeing the program, but the program is being administered by HBDi, and Marlon will certainly speak in a few minutes and also answer any questions that you may have. And so what is the role of HBDi as the program administrator? So HBDi has been doing the marketing and the outreach. Hopefully you've seen the fantastic social media presence that we've had via ads, as well as the email blast that we've sent out with these, what I think are really, really beautiful flyers. So we've been doing a significant amount of marketing, and also HBDi is responsible for processing the applications that are actually received via our online portal and assessing the eligibility for businesses and chambers that apply. In addition, they will be responsible for dispersing the funds once those determinations are made, and they're also providing the recovery and resilience technical assistance component of the program. So who's eligible? Who's eligible to apply to receive grants in this program? So the business must be a for-profit business that has its principal place of business within city limits. That is a core requirement. Also, the business must show evidence that they have been significantly that their revenue has significantly decreased as a result of COVID. As well as the business needs to have annual revenues that do not exceed $2 million pre-COVID. A business must be in good standing with city requirements, taxes, no debarments, etc. A business has to commit to actually completing the technical assistance component of this program in order to be eligible. The same criteria will be, similar criteria will be applied to chambers of commerce. We do also have a list of businesses that are ineligible for the program. I'm not going to go through each of them here. I do want to direct you to the website, to the application portal website, which is cityofhouston-SBERP.org, and you will be able to actually see in detail the list of ineligible businesses. So after we've determined whether or not business has actually met the core criteria that I mentioned, we're also going to be looking at different, we'll have a scoring matrix that will be a part of determining who's eligible for the businesses. So the city wanted to make sure that there's an equitable distribution of funds as much as possible. And so for our program, we have identified different priority areas for us in terms of determining, dispersing the funds. And so we want to make sure that funds are dispersed across the city, and particularly in complete communities, to make sure that, you know, those businesses that have been historically disenfranchised will have access to funding. We're also looking at, you know, who do these businesses employ? Are they actually employing individuals that are designated as low to moderate income individuals? Do they employ more than 10 employees, just in the interest of job retention in the community? Now that's you know, we're certainly interested in supporting businesses that have, you know, 1 or 2 employees. These are just factors that we're looking at and where we're adding weighted scoring to. We're also looking, we want to support those businesses that have been around for a while, that, you know, that have been around for 5 or more years, those legacy businesses, to make sure that the services that they provide, that they deliver to communities, can be retained, that residents can continue to enjoy. We also would want to support businesses that, you know, objectively exhibit some likelihood of surviving the pandemic. We want to invest in their ability to actually sustain themselves. And last but certainly not least, we're interested in supporting businesses that have historically had challenges with access to capital. Also, those businesses that may not have received PPP, EIDL loans, or other types of grants, right? So if you have received any kind of assistance via the SBA or or Harris County, for example, a business is not precluded from being able to get grants. But we certainly, if you didn't get enough money, objectively receive enough money from other sources, you're eligible, but you may not be weighted as high in the application process to determine whether or not you actually will receive a grant. And we also want to certainly support businesses that have a high level of revenue loss. So this is a grant program, like I said. So we're not trying to have, you know, businesses jump through the hoops and provide a whole host of financial documents. We were trying to make this as streamlined and as simple as possible. So we're asking for basic documentation. We're asking for a business tax return for 2019 and/or a profit and loss statement for 2019. We also want to take a look at the activity of the business during the second quarter of this year, during the months of April, May, and June. Profit loss statements for that period is perfectly fine, or bank statements. As part of the application process, we do want, while we recognize that businesses may not have a, you know, fully fleshed out recovery and resiliency plan, at least as part of the application, we want the business to make a statement about how does the business plan on surviving during this time. And of course, you know, as we go along, if there are additional documentations that are required, we'll ask for them, and we do expect businesses to comply. So how can these funds be used? So there are funds that are provided under the CARES Act, which is specifically provided for COVID-19 related purposes. And so we've decided there are two categories for the use of these funds. So the operating costs, absolutely, these funds can be used for payroll, for rent, for mortgage, for PPE, and any other expenses that are associated with the impact of staving off the impact of COVID-19. But we also want a portion of the funds to be used for marketing and retooling costs. So for those businesses that needed to pivot, to change in some way to survive this pandemic, that is absolutely allowable. We want businesses to think about how do you market your services differently to be successful. And so we're encouraging the use of the money in those ways. And, you know, certainly to put up, if it's not already done, plastic sneeze guards, efficiency, air filters, drive-up windows. Those are just examples of ways in which businesses have had to retool for COVID-19. So how will funds be dispersed? So funds are going to be dispersed in two phases. So the phase, once eligibility is determined, once it's determined that a business should receive a grant, the first half of the amount will be dispersed upon that determination. The second half will not be dispersed until the business has actually completed the recovery and resiliency component of the program. And so that part of the recovery and resiliency component of the program is focusing on things like HR, marketing, how to market in this environment, capacity building elements that businesses actually need to focus on, marketing, finance. Again, we're really trying to complement the provision of the financial resources with tools for further business development. And so, like I mentioned, you know, the program was kicked off last week. We opened up the application portal at 8 a.m. on August 19th, and the application portal will be open until September 4th until 11:59 p.m. on September 4th. So businesses have time to apply. We encourage business owners to take their time with the application, since we're not going to be dispersing funds on a first come first served basis. There's been time built into this process because we want to make sure that businesses are thoughtful and will provide us with what is needed to make a reasonable eligibility determination. And so we plan on dispersing the funds over a two-month period at this time. And that's my part. I'll invite Marlon to make any comments he'd like.
And while Marlon is coming, if you have any questions and you want to type in the chat feature, go ahead and do so.
Thank you, Portia. I have to remember to unmute myself. So, no, I was just adding that I think you covered it all, Marsha, very well. I would just admonish those and implore you, if you have a small business that's in need, take advantage of this wonderful opportunity. What the city and the Office of OBO is doing is fantastic. I know that there's a great need during this pandemic. It's presented a huge challenge for small businesses across the city. And so this doesn't come around often, an opportunity to get a $50,000 grant. So you've got plenty of time. The portal doesn't close until September the 4th at 10:59 p.m. The application process is straightforward. It's intended to be user-friendly, minimal documents that are required to be submitted. And if you have any questions, I would encourage you to send an email to City of Houston. Let me say why I did that. We're also administering the Harris County program, and they kind of overlap. So, but for this program, send an email to info@cityofhouston-sberp.org, or you can call us at 713-845-2462. And of course, visit the website where there's a lot of useful information there.
You know, I neglected to mention that the intention in terms of determining the amount of the grant is to provide 3 months worth of operating costs to businesses.
Okay, we have a question, and that question is just to confirm that businesses that have been open less than 1 year should not apply.
That's correct. The program is designed for businesses that were established at least 1 year prior to the pandemic or prior to March 1st of 2020.
I don't see any further questions in the chat. Does anyone have a question they would like to ask at this moment? Okay, well, I'll give you some time to think about your questions. Again, feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll also take questions at the end of the webinar. So we will move on to our next guest. And I'm going to pull up her so you can see Michelle Levi McDaniel. She is an experienced speaker who has developed training programs and spoken at many public forums over the past 15 years. She's an experienced tax preparer, staff accountant, auditor, and compliance officer, and has worked on both sides of the auditing process. Her business, Elite Image Tax, has been celebrated as a 2016 City of Houston Success Story and 2017 SBA Emerging Leader. She's also listed in the True Fund Subject Matter Expert Directory, as well was part of the Goldman Sachs Small Business and Leadership Class of 39. So Michelle, how are you doing? And I will pull up your slides as you come to the webinar.
I am doing great. And I want to thank you all for, at the City of Houston Office of Business Opportunity, for always allowing those of us that are small businesses to participate in such forums, and to really care about whether or not we succeed. So as a small business owner, I appreciate what you guys do to help us out. So today, I wanted to talk about, for those of us that need to understand the CARES, Dr. Murray mentioned the CARES Act and why the City of Houston got the funds, but there's another portion to the CARES Act that I don't think has been publicized as much as it should. So can you go to the next slide for me? Or do I do that? Yep.
I got you.
So there are 4 best practices that we want to talk about before we get over to the section 1106 for the CARES Act. So there are 4 best practices that I would like for all of us to consider during this time is to implement your financial plans, which goes back to what Ms. Murray was saying about how they really want us to be resilient in our businesses. And that resiliency, it includes growth. So in implementing what your financial plans look like, to manage what your financial goals are, stay connected to the financial resources. You have a few on the line to include Mr. Marlon. And then how to be resilient, which is again a part of the package with the city. And I will say, Ms. Murray, I had no idea that what those highlights were going to be a part of your presentation. So we were kind of thinking the same. So those are the 4 best practices that I want us to walk away with today to kind of understand where we are. So the next slide. So the most important is what I want to talk about today. In the CARES Act, Section 1106 is for the federal income taxation portion of the CARES Act. And so I will try to share more of this in writing because I know time won't allow us to go into each component, but we'll try to give you the highlights. So with the Paycheck Protection Program, which you're reporting, for those of you that have received funding in those first rounds, if your lender has not already requested, the request will be coming up for the 8-week reporting of what you've done with the funds that you received the first go around. When you do that reporting, you're going to be asked to give a financial statement of how you spent the dollars that you were allotted. And if the dollars were spent according to what you applied for, then that portion of the loan will be forgiven. I know a lot of people were concerned with the loan forgiveness. What does that look like? How do I get it? How will they give it to me? How you will be approved. It is an approved process. you have to have spent the dollars on allotted costs that you requested. If you did not spend the dollars on your rent, your payroll, and such things as that, or you even requested you were going to use payroll, but then you somehow still let the staff go, or you laid them off, that portion of the loan will not be forgiven. So what I want people to understand is that whatever portion of the loan that is not forgiven, that portion of that loan will become income to you. That portion you will need to report on your taxes. Whatever portion of the loan is forgiven is simply that. It's forgiven. Your loan documentation through your lender will be recalculated. It will show the portion that was forgiven, and it will show you the remaining portion that's left, and that's what you'll be taxed on. So please make sure that you're very accurate in your reportings in that process. For expenses, same thing. Expenses that were paid with the lending funds that you receive from those loans will also be excluded from being expenses on your tax returns. So the loan portion that's forgiven with those expenses will also be forgiven, and so that is not reportable on your tax return. So that means, business owners, that if you pay bills with that funding, you cannot still double dip and then write it off as expenses when it's time to do your taxes. So you got to be very, very careful of that. I'm going to suggest during these times that you have a separate reporting system. If you're, if you don't have a CPA or an accountant that's helping you, I will suggest that you can go into QuickBooks or whatever accounting software that you're using. Even if you don't have an accounting software, create yourself a spreadsheet and use that spreadsheet as your guide, so that when it's time for you to report to your financial agency, you'll know how much you receive from them and where you spent those dollars. You'll need to also make sure you have receipts for that as well. If you did not use the funds as requested, then your whole loan will not be forgiven, and then that loan amount will become income to you. So many people are asking, do I need to include my loan in as revenue? No, you do not. Only the portion that is not forgiven. Same with your expenses. And as the third part of the CARES Act that I think will benefit some small businesses, that will be implemented in September of this year, will be that the payroll taxes will be reduced. So for those of us that have staff, we're using payroll. So the payroll taxes will be reduced for now with at a limited percentage, and I do believe it's about 6%, depending on, that's an average, depending on what your payroll looks like, which will also help your employees, because as our taxes are reduced, then our employees get to see a little bit more in their paycheck based on that reduction. So the same with the grants. There will still be some financial reporting for that as well. I like the plan that the city is using to make sure that you're being resilient and being proper with the funding. So out of this, make sure that your reporting is accurate. Make sure that you're not, you didn't commingle those funds that you received during the first round of funding. Make sure that you're accurate in your reporting, so that you want the majority of that loan forgiven, so that you won't have to pay taxes on it. Make sure that the expenses that you applied for, that you used and you took care of, and then be prepared with the remaining, because it will be taxed on your tax return. If you do not include the taxable portion of any of your paycheck protection lending options, if you do not report it, your penalization on the taxation side would be very high. And I don't want to see anybody affected by that. So please make sure, that you stay within the guidelines. Whoever your lender is, I would suggest that you stay in touch with your lender. If you have not received the notification to report your 8-week reporting or that financial statement for those dollars, then you might want to reach out to them so that you can stay ahead and be prepared with that reporting as well. So do I wait? Do we open it up for questions, or do you want to wait to the end?
No, I just want to make sure we can open it up for questions right now. Let's see. Someone
And
have a question? Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Let me say that if, and in its entirety, if anyone is interested in the reading, you can go to the irs.gov and you can click on CARES Act, and the section code for reporting is section 1106. And it does break it out in phases, but that's where a lot of that information came from, as far as the reporting and what will be taxable and what won't.
Okay, so we have a question, and that is, do you have to have employees W-2, or can you qualify with contract workers?
That is more of a lender question, but I can say that I did have some clients that qualified with 1099 miscellaneous work statements because, but this was something that was done last year, not current. So prior to COVID, if you, had your payroll reportings, then, and if that was included, then that was accepted. But there were some lenders that did not accept that. So I think it just depends on who that lender is, and maybe Mr. Marlon can answer that directly because they are a lender.
Yes, so, and I'm not certain if that question was referring to the PPP or the SBERP program.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's relative to the SBERP program, the grant program, we don't consider contract employees. We're looking at full-time employees as well as full-time equivalents or part-time employees. A follow-up question I think the same person asked was, if you have 10 employees, are you welcome? If you have less than 10 employees, are you welcome to apply? And the answer is yes. Mm-hmm. You can have one employee, you can be self-employed and still qualify for the small business economic relief program.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Michelle, one other question, is the idle loan taxable?
That is a tricky question because it depends on what was in your lending documents in your contract. So I would suggest that you review your, so you will go back to your lender. It should be included in your service agreement or your contract to determine what the reporting is and how it will be reported. And then from there, depending on how your lender, it was structured, it could be taxable. So that's something that I would start with your lender. If I don't know, Portia, you can reach out to me directly because, it may be some underlying circumstances with that, and I don't want to give you the wrong information without knowing what your lending documents look like.
Michelle, can you type in your information into the chat so that they can be able to contact you?
Yes, ma'am, when I find the chat.
So Michelle, I do have one follow-up.
Yes,
I do
ma'am.
have one follow-up. So we had received some guidance via the CARES Act FAQs about instances in which the grant could be taxable.
Mhm.
Are you familiar with the exceptions to that?
Yes, if I showed you what my CARES Act book looked like, you guys would laugh at me. So it's about midway through a Bible. I do know that it is currently on the table. I know that legislation hasn't been passed on whether portions of it will be treated as the same as the PPE or not. And to be honest with you, I don't even know when they'll pass that. So I would just say that would be something else that I could follow up with you and get you the correct answer on that. But there are some grants that will not be, that will be taxable. It depends on the lending institution and where the money came from for the grant. The CARES Act, those dollars were protected under that CARES Act law and legislation. There are some other organizations that received funds from different outlets that those grants will be reported because of how they received the funding. So it depends on the source of the funding, whether or not the grant is acceptable. So in my opinion, the way I read that, if it is not a part of the CARES Act, if it is not a part of the SBA with the lenders that are included in that, then you might want to consider, where the money is coming from and if you'll be affected by that. But for these people in your program, that's not a concern.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Michelle. And I'm going to bring up our next expert. Thank you, Michelle, for sharing the information and telling everybody about the loan documentation and what's taxable and what's, forgivable. And if you all have any more questions for Michelle or for Marsha or for Marlon, make sure you type those in the chat feature and we'll get to those. So right now we're going to bring up our next guest expert, and that is Anton Krayniy. Anton works for Vinson Elkins LLP in Houston. His principal areas of practice are the upstream and midstream oil and gas transactions, clean energy transactions, project development, and mergers and acquisitions. But he is a familiar face here to Access Granted because he's been here before sharing legal tips and advice. He is an expert on COVID-related funding as in regards to small businesses and what you all need to know as far as how to open up your business, anything you need to be worried about or concerned about from the legal aspect. So, and he also helps with our Houston Small Business Legal Consultation. That is a program that they partner with us here at OBO for free legal advice for an hour. We have top attorneys that are ready to answer your questions. Any COVID-related questions, they can definitely help you. Go to our website at houstontx.gov/OBO, and you will see that that designation to click on that link and make an appointment to speak to an attorney. So Anton, thank you again for joining us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be back here. And everyone has done a really excellent job already explaining everything, and I'm going to do my best not to repeat anything. So I just wanted to add to start. I'm going to basically just add a little bit to what's been said about this specific program. But and if this is all right with you, Portia, I'd like to discuss more of the gradual reopening, the logistics, what to look out for, the kind of commercial general liability insurance, things like this that a lot of the small businesses might not really have guidance for. If that's okay, I'd like to do a little bit on that.
Absolutely.
Okay, wonderful. So most of what I had on this specific program has been said. So the one thing I do want to add is, and this seems to be a central theme, it's keeping track of your financials and being really detailed. I think everyone's mentioned this at least once in our talks, and it's incredibly important. And Michelle, I believe, was talking about the PPP and how that works with this specific program. One of the other things to look out for is, for loan forgiveness under the PPP, that those payroll costs, you have to maintain a 60-40 split, with 60% of that loan to get loan forgiveness. And this is part of the important part of maintaining really, really close financial records, right? If you can trace the money going from the PPP loan directly to payroll costs, then you have a way better shot of establishing that that loan was used for that. If you don't have the financials very clear and you use, you get this fund and then you use this money for payroll costs and you use the majority of the PPP for non-payroll, then you might actually begin to cut into your loan forgiveness. So it's a really important thing to keep in mind, maintaining really, really tight watch on your financials, recording everything, and really ensuring that you have that 60% payroll cost, 60-40 split, I guess. So 60% of those PPP funds are going towards payroll costs. So I think one of the common questions with this program is how this affects eligibility for other programs. Obviously, the PPP application is over, but the PPP, and I think Marsha might have mentioned this, can affect your eligibility for this program by decreasing your need and showing that you already have other funding sources. So that's something to keep in mind. But for the economic injury disaster loans, you don't need to prove that you've received funding, that you can't receive funding elsewhere, kind of a backward sentence. But basically, in your application, you don't have to show the SBA that, I applied for this loan and this loan and this loan and couldn't get it, so I need this EIDL loan. You don't need to prove that. So this really wouldn't mess with that application. Yeah, so absolutely do apply. The other thing I think, and Marsha and Marlon both touched on this, is that criteria that the requirements for a business to be eligible really, and I wanted to make a point of mentioning this so that people aren't shocked. It really doesn't ensure, and that's part of why I think Marsha and Marlon talked about the prioritization, right? That is gonna be what determines. I mean, it's a single pie, and everybody wants a slice, I guess, to put it in layman's terms, right? And everyone needs help in a time like this. So as we've stressed, and we'll keep stressing, you have to keep tight financials so that increases it can increase your the probability of receiving these funds. And I mean, you see that with one of the prioritization things is a business's recovery and resilience plan shows that the business has a strong chance of surviving during and post COVID-19. Well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that if a business has consistent, even if they're not strong financials, but has consistent good business practices, that can help put your business up higher in the list and the priority, right? I don't think that, if there's so many people looking for these loans, there's people who you just can't show your funding. You can't show that you have challenges with obtaining business funding. You don't have the records to prove this. Well, then, you're going to go to the bottom of the line, right? Or back of the line. So again, really, I don't think it can be emphasized enough, but really keeping track of all your records and which money goes where might sound a little ridiculous because it's just money, it's just funds, but it goes pretty far in securing more funding. So enough bashing that point. I'll move on to something I find this very interesting. It's part of the reason I wanted to jump in and talk about this. But we're starting to see the first wave of lawsuits pertaining to reopening and COVID-19. We're starting to see, Walmart got sued recently by an employee for, I think it was the person's symptoms were overlooked at work. They didn't go home. And then 2 days later, they were sent home because the symptoms worsened. The person died. His estate sued Walmart. Safeway's been sued. Tyson's been sued by employees. So, and those companies, right? Not to bash them, but those are large corporations that have the money and the legal infrastructure to kind of handle those lawsuits. But if you're a small business, you might not have that capacity. One of those lawsuits can be crushing. So I think it's really important to discuss the best practices legally for reopening, because, you know, a lot of businesses have to reopen now and they have the opportunity to. I think one thing I'd like to mention is that, you know, in a normal system, it'd be really difficult for an employer to be liable for employees' deaths tied to the workplace, right? In a normal situation, it'd be really hard to prove that. There's a big legal bar for finding fault, determining causation, all of this. But under COVID, it gets a little bit more complicated. So there's this concept of negligence per se. If you violate a statute, you don't need to prove as much, right? If there's a statute, there's a couple of requirements, but if it's designed to protect a certain type of person from a certain type of harm, and you violated that statute and that harm happens to that person, they have to prove way less. And so a lot of claims are being filed under this concept of negligence per se. And that really, the reason they're able to file these claims is because of this guidance that's been issued by OSHA and the CDC, which kind of gives business, it gives you the regulations and the guidelines that you should be following. So it gives an employee something to point to be like, look, you didn't follow this regulation specifically right here. I got infected with COVID on the job, and now whatever else happened, I'm going to sue you as the employer. These lawsuits, to my knowledge, haven't been settled and haven't been resolved yet. So I can't give a hard, you know, this is exactly what happened. This is how it will be. But I mean, even an ongoing lawsuit is a financial loss, and something that no one wants to be involved in. So in getting past the scary part and trying to go to how do we, you know, stop this from happening? How do we protect ourselves? A lot of people, and this makes a lot of sense, a lot of people have been participating in you know, drafting up these waivers, these COVID-19 waivers for employees and for customers. And it's great to be proactive. It's obviously a step in the right direction, but companies need to be extremely careful, because these waivers, if they're not drafted correctly, can actually go towards, can backfire pretty substantially too. And for that reason, I would highly recommend, you know, going to an attorney to get one of these drafted. It's not so much just because it needs to be written in a complicated way. It's kind of the opposite. You have to write it in such a manner that every single person who reads it can ascertain what's going on. You have to specifically say what it is, the liability you're releasing them from, and you have to draft it exactly correctly. And even if you do, and this is kind of the tough part, and you're not following the guidelines well enough, you could still be held liable. So you have to do both. You have to follow these CDC guidelines, and I really can't stress enough, posting them at work is a great idea, right? Showing that you have these guidelines up so employees can see these and be you know, constantly aware. Fact checking the guidelines you do get. You can't just pull something off the internet that looks like it's legit and you haven't checked it out, right? You want to use something that's formally from the CDC, OSHA, and there's a lot of guidance out there. Posting stuff like that around, sending out emails to your employees, enforcing the mask thing. I know it's tough sometimes, especially it's hot. It's real hot in Houston. And it's tough to wear the mask all day for sure. But at the end of the day, it's something that you should absolutely enforce, and employees might gripe about it sometimes, but you need to protect yourself, and your employees need to be protected. And I mean, not just financially, I guess, in terms of health as well. It's just a good idea. But yeah, that's, and Portia, I don't want to get too into the liability waivers. If you'd like at another time, I can do a whole spiel on how they should be drafted and what we can do. So if you'd like, we can link up for that.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so I did just want to make sure, you know, that if employers are trying to do that, small businesses are trying to participate in this and draft these waivers, they're extremely careful, and they do some kind of legal consultation, I can't stress enough, should be used, because part of it is, you know, if an employer, if this liability waiver isn't good enough, then, and this is my next point, it can undermine your insurance claim. Under your commercial general liability insurance. So under your commercial general liability insurance, it typically covers occurrences, right? Occurrences are defined as accidents. And those include continuous or repeated exposure to substantially the same general harmful conditions. Kind of using this example definition, right? But a big point of this is foreseeability. You need to, and something is an accident if it's unforeseeable, right? So bringing me back to what we were just talking about, if you draft a liability waiver that is not effective, you've basically showed that you've clearly, it's foreseeable to you, right? You've like given concrete evidence of foreseeability. You've basically said, yeah, of course. And then if you don't follow the guidelines, well, then it's totally a foreseeable consequence, right? Versus, you know, you're following all the guidelines, you're doing everything you can. I think that's far more likely to be considered an accident under your CGL and potentially be covered. Now, there's certain exemptions that can still happen under your CGL insurance. So my next bit would be to review that, to see if there's some kind of exclusion for communicable diseases. Sometimes they fall under bacterial diseases, viral infections, organic pathogens, things like that, expected or intended exclusions. That one's kind of tough to prove. But these are all things that you need to, and trust me, not an interesting read. I can promise you, you're reading your CGL policy is not going to be thrilling, but it's very necessary. And like I said, taking that point about the waivers, I think waivers are a great idea, but again, I can't stress enough how they should be drafted very, very carefully. Because that also, at the end of the day, if you do get into a courtroom and a judge looks at your waiver and it is overbroad and it's complicated, you're not going to look good. You're not going to prove it. And if it goes to a jury, I mean, there's no jury is going to support, you know what I mean? If you think about it, no jury is going to support a business if in that kind of situation, if the business's waiver that they had the person sign was super broad and complicated and the person didn't know what they were signing. It just paints a pretty ugly picture, right? So again, that's a very important thing. Yeah, there's a little bit more I could get into on the CGL policies. But I don't want to get too nuanced. The main thing is again, keeping track. If you do get any claims, you do get any of that stuff, I wouldn't even say claims filed. If you get any sort of even hint that someone is sick or that a customer or employee is concerned, send them home. Not worth it. Doesn't matter. Hire a temp worker, something like that. Just there's really no need to put yourself in that sort of position in terms of liability, and it might save you, you know, a couple dollars to staff with the same workforce that you've been staffing, right? It might be easier, but it's absolutely not worth it if you get into a legal battle like this and you need to prove that you've been following guidelines. Send anyone sick home, consistently follow the guidelines, post them where you can, review those waivers, review the CGL insurance, and yeah, hopefully reopen, make money, and grow. I mean, that's like the ideal, right? And we can finally get back to normal, I hope.
Thank you, Anton. And we have some questions here. And Anton, I had my employees sign our COVID policy. Do I need to do more?
So you should review the like if you had counsel in drafting the policy, then you should be fine. I would say you should also, regardless of whether they sign the COVID policy, you should be following the guidelines, the CDC and OSHA guidelines at work. Just liability waivers are a state-to-state thing. Some states don't even accept liability waivers as an excuse. Some states do in certain instances. I think Texas is a little split. Like it just has to meet certain criteria and then maybe it'll be upheld. But again, judges can look at it and just throw it out, especially if it's not drafted right. So my advice would absolutely be to go ahead and have that reviewed by an attorney if you haven't already. And if you have, that's great. You're ahead of the curve. Just ensure that you have like employees following those CDC guidelines. And it wouldn't hurt at all to have them posted, or to send out, every once in a while, send out, hey, here's a link to the CDC guidelines. Please practice these anytime you're on premises. That kind of stuff really helps bolster a case. So if in the worst case situation, a claim gets filed, you can fight the claim by saying, look, I've been doing everything I can as a business owner to ensure that my employees are following the rules and doing this. And I checked out this waiver. I made sure they were ready to come in, and that, we weren't taking any liability for this. And we made sure they knew the waiver said that specifically. So yeah, definitely ensure that the guidelines are still being followed regardless of the waiver.
Okay. And we have another question. I'm a subcontractor. I've been requested to update my pre-qualification statement with the general contractor. I completed a project for them back in May during COVID. Now that I have to renew, DPR Construction is requesting me as part of the questionnaire an internal balance sheet for the first quarter 2020, which was horrible. How could that affect my company?
In terms of this specific project, you still would have to submit it, I think. I would check out your contract, your initial contract for them. If there's a clause that talks about the renewal specifically and says that you can renew under the same terms without providing further information, you might not even have to provide this. Again, this is a very nuanced issue, so I don't want to give the wrong advice without the full picture. But I also think that if it comes down to it and you need to pass along the internal balance sheet, I do think you should be cognizant of the fact that yours isn't the only business that's going to have terrible numbers for the first quarter of 2020. That's a universal thing, and everyone knows it. I would absolutely give an addendum if I personally was to submit those numbers. I would also give an addendum and show my numbers under normal circumstances. Because at the end of the day, part of it is getting all the work done I think there's a specific word for it, workmanly manner or something like that. But if you can prove that under normal circumstances and in general, you can get the work done in the right way, I don't think it's going to affect your business a ton. But again, I think this is more like a business outlook that I don't know if I'm as qualified to answer.
And we have a question for Marsha and Marlon. We tried to apply for the grant and it said our address was invalid. Can either one of you speak to that?
Sure. So if you can send your address by way of email to us, and we'll verify that, and put your contact information so that we can reach back out to you and contact you directly.
And then we have another question. Anton, I believe this is for you. How is cause and fact but for handled in instances without contact tracing? Any relevant case law related to communicable disease?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't have as much of a legal background, causation is a big element in proving negligence claims. But for cause is like saying this wouldn't have happened but for, blank. I wouldn't have slipped but for the banana peel you put on the ground, right? Cause and fact is another form of causation, and it's like what specifically caused this to happen. Trying to define that without using the same word is a little tough. But in terms of how this is being handled, in negligence, it's tough to say because none of these cases have reached a conclusion, but it does not seem that they're going to be following the same, sort of case law or the same analysis. I think it's going to pull from communicable diseases, but I don't know if it's going to be exactly the same. And I think the reason for this is because, like I said, because of all the guidelines and all of the advice given by OSHA. And if you think about it, I don't think any disease has gotten to this point ever. So, what is it since the epidemic or the pandemic, and was it the 20s or the 30s? But we've never seen this before. And as a legal community, this is a very weird issue, especially, you know, the but-for causation issue is the first thing you think of, right? How are you going to prove that, you know, the reason I got COVID was because I was in the office? You're outside going to the grocery store, doing all this other stuff. How are you going to prove that? I know that in the Tyson case right now, one of the problems is that it was, you know, 3 employees that ended up getting it, and then there was an outbreak. And they were still supposed to go to work, and then an outbreak happened at their office. So I think that, like, it begins to be like contact tracing is very relevant, but obviously it's never been, yeah, it's just a very difficult thing to prove. Again, I do think that that negligence per se is probably going to be the route through which recovery is most likely. And I also think, and this is unfortunate because it seems to set a bad precedent, but I also do believe that there's going to be a little bit more leeway in handling causation with regards to these cases specifically, just from a public policy perspective. I think that judges are going to want companies to take ownership of ensuring these policies of the fact that they want to ensure these policies are going to be handled and obeyed. And that might not exactly fit within the realm of our current legal analysis. Sorry if I'm getting too like theoretical here, but it is something that I've thought about as well. And I think that it's going to be case by case. I know that at least 2 of these cases are in federal court. I think they all might be, but we'll just have to see how this ends up panning out and how causation is going to be handled with these cases. I believe the first one was Safeway, but we'll see. So the other difficulty is they always settle things like this out of court, and you don't really get to see the discussion or anything like that. So.
Okay. So we're a little bit over time, but I just want to, this was a lot of information for everybody, and I hope you all were able to get your questions answered. I'll also, as a follow-up, send a link to this video so that you can watch it again and really soak in the information, as well as the information for the legal consultation for you to take advantage of that. If you look in the chat too, you can also see Michelle's information. Anton, if you want to type yours in there, that'd be great too. There's also the information about the grant program. If you have any questions about the application process or thereafter, the phone number and email address is there, and as well as the website to apply if you have not applied for that just of yet. So as we conclude, is there any final words that our panelists want to share before we leave that they didn't get to say before, that they know that's really, really important for our small business owners on the line?
Yeah, I just want to echo what you said, really, just for people to apply for the grants. You don't have to pay them back. So this is, I just want to encourage that, and do so by 11:59 p.m. on September 4th.
All right. And then as you see on your screen, if you have any questions, our website is there also for you to connect with us. Social media, the information is there as well. We thank you all for attending and look forward to the email coming from me with the follow-up about this webinar. And Anton, I'm definitely taking you up on your offer. Everybody heard it, that you will do a webinar on waivers. So everyone, I'll send you the information to that as well, so you can sign up and hear and learn from Anton about how to get this waiver together so that you can avoid the legalities regarding that.
Sure thing. I'm ready. I'm excited. I looked at my notes and was like, this is way too much to talk about right now. I should not, shouldn't even start.
So again, thank you to Michelle, Marlon, Marsha, and Anton, and everybody. Stay safe and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.